Moving on to Iran now, where for the first time since the social uprisings of 2022, voters have been called on to cast their ballots for members of parliament and a religious body called the Assembly of Experts. Now, following the huge demonstrations, the elections are a test of public sentiment toward Iran's establishment. The country's leaders are in dire need to legitimize their grip on power. But with frustration with the Islamic regime running high, surveys suggest turnout could hit the lowest point since the 1979 revolution. Now, Iran is in the middle of a deepening economic crisis, and discontent over political and social freedoms has been growing for years.
The signs are everywhere and the messaging is clear. Iran has been scrambling to boost voter turnout ahead of Friday's election. It's introducing electronic voting in several cities, and the number of female candidates vying for a seat is more than double what it was in the last parliamentary election in 2020. But the government's efforts appear to be falling on deaf ears.
Personally, I will not take part in this election because the results of the last two elections were not good.
The biggest problem with the election is the people's lack of trust in Parliament.
Political distrust and an ailing economy have helped fuel voter apathy. Although the elections are seen as a crucial barometer for legitimacy, the government's own surveys show participation will be well below 50%. Friday's vote includes polls for members of parliament and the Assembly of Experts, who have the power to appoint Iran's supreme leader. The country's system of pre-approving candidates has led to mass disqualifications and the removal of true choice, according to critics of the current hardline government.
This time, the word election is completely meaningless. It should be called an anti-election or a non-election. The election is rejected by the people, and the Islamic Republic cannot sell it to them.
The memory of Mahsa Amini is also casting a long shadow over this year's vote. The 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian died after she was taken into police custody for allegedly violating the Islamic dress code. Her death led to a wave of mass protests against the hijab law and other social issues in 2022. The movement was violently crushed by authorities, but the demands for change and an end to the Islamic Republic's rule endure.
Let's bring in Behnam Ben Taleblu. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. His work focuses on Iranian security and political issues, and he joins me tonight from Washington. Good to see you. Now, first off, should we even be calling this exercise an election?
It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's an excellent question. For over a decade now, many independent Iran watchers, Iran experts, Iran analysts have been calling these selections. These are tightly managed, politically choreographed moves, often kind of overseen by a proxy of Iran's supreme leader, the Guardian Council, through a series of disqualifications, through a series of vetting procedures, and in essence, fabricated numbers to continue to contract the already very limited space in Iran's Islamist and authoritarian system and shift it further to the right. So, in short, these are really more selections and performative than elections.
Has repression of dissent, which we've seen bubble up again and again over the past, especially 2 years, has it stepped up in the run-up to this vote?
Indeed, although in the very short campaign period, about 2 weeks before Election Day, March 1st, traditionally you see the Islamic Republic try to dial down some of the pressure, try to incentivize more people to turn out and to vote. You have, the Islamic Republic trying to reach a broader audience than the already very narrow audience they know that they can only reach. But in general, the apparatus of repression remains operating in the background. For example, in the run-up to this very limited electoral cycle, you had the Islamic Republic even crack down not just on ethnic and sectarian minorities, but also on the use of VPNs or virtual private networks. So the regime's repression continues both on the streets and in cyberspace.
It's only 18 months since the death of Gina Mahsa Amini and the extraordinary protest movement that followed and the crackdown that managed to silence much of the dissent. How much is left of that movement in Iran today?
Well, what is clear is that movement was not born of a vacuum, and that movement certainly is not over. What I mean by that is you've seen a whole series of boom and bust cycles of street protests in the Islamic Republic, starting in 2017, actually, that are triggered by distinctly non-political events, often economic grievances, social grievances, environmental grievances, even foreign policy grievances. But they're not triggered by political events anymore, like the 1999 closure of a reformist newspaper or the 2009 stealing of an election from a reformist candidate. The population has moved away from reform and largely towards revolution. And what that means is there's a boom and bust cycle of unpredictable social explosions in the battle between the street and the state. So while perhaps the next generation of protesters may not chant women, life, freedom, the forces that brought this generation, as well as a cross-section of Iranians from over 150 different cities, towns, and villages in the 2022-2023 protests is likely to endure.
Mm-hmm. And the regime is, of course, seeking legitimacy and wants to tighten its grip on power, especially after those revolutionary efforts that followed the death of Gina Mahsa Amini. What is the likelihood of change in Iran after this vote?
Well, after this vote, I think there's change in the wrong direction, meaning what we've seen now by these series of 2020 parliamentary elections, 2021 presidential election, and now the Parliament and Assembly of Experts election in 2024, the system continued to move to the hard right. There is stage management by Iran's supreme leader, who's going to be 85 quite soon, and is looking to cement and institutionalize his ultra-hardline legacy. And what he's doing is ensuring that there is a constellation of ultra-hardline forces that are more righteous than capable. You know, there was a phrase that was said during the Cultural Revolution period in Iranian universities in the 1980s. If I'm not mistaken, the phrase in Persian was taqwa, not tawano, which means righteousness, not capability. So you're seeing essentially hardcore believers where already classical, you could say conservative forces are critiquing these hardcore believers for simply not even being capable managers. These are the kinds of people that are being promoted, and these are the kinds of contractions and political changes in the wrong direction being seen, because these are what is being orchestrated by Iran's ultra-hardline revolutionary elite, particularly Khamenei.
How far are Iranians from having free and fair elections?
Unfortunately, they're quite far. I think so long as there's an Islamic Republic, particularly an Islamic Republic that has elements like the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the layered security apparatus that includes kind of semi-formalized vigilante groups like Ansar Hezbollah, that continues to have a Basij, which is quite literally a check on all forces of civil society, and most importantly, a supreme leader position like this, a constitution that was, foisted upon the Iranian population, amended in the wrong direction in 1989, you're likely to see the regime, the ultra-hardline regime, continue to represent something fundamentally different than the national interest and public good, which when you look at Iranian history, particularly modern Iranian history or contemporary Iranian history, you've seen a century-long quest for representative government, of which most unfortunately the population is still far from today.
That was Behnam Ben Taleblu from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Thank you so much for those insights.
Thank you.